So the U.S. Army is in the process of adopting a brand new rifle, and it is a dumb rifle. I don't say that lightly. I think it is a big swing and a miss. And a lot of folks are talking about all the technical issues they're having with it as it's being fielded, like a wobbly rail. They're saying that it isn't as accurate as it's supposed to be. The optic is a little finicky because there's a lot of computer stuff going on there. But I'm not going to talk about all the technical stuff. That's all stuff that, can be worked out theoretically through the development process. I am much more interested in the tactical, the doctrinal approach to this and how it's actually used on the battlefield. And when you start looking at it in that lens, it doesn't make any goddamn sense, to be frank. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you've never seen this rifle before, this is the Sig Sauer M7. It is what the Army is replacing the M4s with in their inventory. Emphasis on replace. This is not like a specialty DMR. This is not an assault gun. This is replacing every rifleman's kit on active duty and eventually even in the National Guard, in infantry, Cav Scouts, everywhere, so that this is going to replace the 5.56 M4 with this new battle rifle concept, shooting a 6.8 by 51, which is basically just a neck down 7.62 NATO that they have added a spicier powder in. They've added a bimetal jacket to handle the extreme chamber pressure. It's being shot out of a 13-inch barrel. They gave it a suppressor. They gave it a really fancy optic with a laser rangefinder ballistic computer, so it can really give you really cool ballistic solutions. Got a folding stock, really cool system. And they did this for the purpose of extending the range of the rifleman and improving bullet lethality for both hard cover and to intercept kind of the threat of emerging enemy body armor systems right there. It's a cool weapon system, and it's really cool to see a lot of innovation happening in the firearms world. We haven't seen stuff like that. It's cool to see them pushing the limits of what you can do with small arms tech. Unfortunately, how they're trying to implement it just doesn't work at all. And I'll kind of start top to bottom with this. So first, the laser rangefinder up here, really cool idea. You can press a button and then it'll shoot a laser out, give you a range, incorporate all of the ballistic data and the humidity and temperature, and give you an actual ballistic solution in a dot that you can then use as basically BDC. Super cool, except the fact that the modern battlefield has so many different ways to identify laser emissions. That's basically shining a light off in the woods at a target, and that can alert the enemy to your location. Creates all sorts of problems. A really cool system to have, doesn't make any sense to have at the lowest level, like the rifleman level. I wouldn't be surprised if commanders get real sick of, basically lasers being shot out every time people are trying to set up TRPs and set up fighting positions, and just say, okay, we're not doing that anymore. That's not something you get at all. Second is the suppressor. Suppressors are really cool. The Marine Corps have been integrating suppressors with their IARs to great effect. Really, really cool system. The problem is that this design with a 13-inch barrel and a full power rifle cartridge, it requires a suppressor. Suppressors are really cool when you can add them on, in the moment. But if you are having a rifleman set up where this is their fighting rifle and they may be engaged in extended, prolonged firefights, gunfights that last hours, even days sometimes, where you're just kind of having that sustained fight, suppressors act as heat sinks, right? They suck in the heat. They absorb a lot of heat. That's how they muffle the sound. And when they're absorbing that much heat, they wear out. They provide a lot of back pressure. There are a lot of issues that run into running suppressor just constantly like that. And they get obscenely hot, which is then easily observed with night vision and with thermals, basically turning this muzzle into a glow stick on the end of your rifle, when you could just have, it doesn't show up as much when you've got like the heat shield around the actual muzzle. And then, of course, we run into the issue of the cartridge itself, right? We talk about, we want this rifle to be able to extend the range of the rifleman, have lethality. So, you need a bigger bullet to go longer distance. Makes sense, right? And while this bullet is very much lethal, this is not a new idea. Right? This is the old battle rifle concept. This is what we tried with the M14. This is what they tried with the FAL. The idea of having like a big bullet with reduced ammo capacities, but you're going to be more accurate. You're going to be, everyone's going to be a rifleman and a sharpshooter. It doesn't really manifest in reality. The problem is that when you get into gunfights, ammo quantity is usually more important than raw accuracy, because you don't just shoot at each other from extended ranges trying to be the most accurate. This isn't the Napoleonic Wars where, hilltop to hilltop trying to be accurate. Instead, you have to shoot, you have to fix the enemy, you have to maneuver, you have to assault. There's a lot of stuff you have to do, and you need ammo to do it. And when you take the rifleman kit, the normal standard infantry loadout right now is 7 mags of 5.56, and you can pretty easily carry 7 mags of 5.56. That's not undoable. That's, you could have a handful of mag pouches on your kit and on your belt, not a big deal. But when you go to a 7.62 or 6.8 equivalent, this is just a massive magazine. So usually when people are trying to set up the kit, it's not just the weight that's an issue. It's not that this is 50% heavier and you can only carry a bit less. It's also the bulk, right? You have a lot of issues where 5.56, these are kind of comparable size, but this is also a lot thicker over here. So when you try and double stack 5.56 mags, not a huge deal. Double stacking these guys on top of each other means that your mag pouches are going to be that much deeper, making it that much bulkier. And then suddenly, before you know it, if you try and carry a full kit of, these mags, you're kind of just waddling around the battlefield without much mobility, right? And of course, it's just doing the math, 20 round mags versus 30 round mags. This means 210 goes down to 140 rounds, right? If you're just carrying the same amount of magazines. And of course, yes, we could just, smoke everybody to death and just say, okay, we're carrying more ammo. But, that extends too, because typically, with these guys, it's not just these, this is a full replacement rifleman's kit right here. This is 210 rounds of 5.56 that I can just carry in this little satchel. You start doing that in 7.62, it becomes a lot harder to carry a sustainable amount of ammunition, and then it also strains supply lines on top of that. We're talking about the next conflict being, large-scale conventional conflict. We run into issues of, what happens if you don't get resupplied? And suddenly you're talking about cutting combat load from 210 to 140 for just the rifleman. That's a problem, right? We need to evaluate that. Sometimes more ammo is better, especially when we don't need to engage targets out to this full range. There's this idea that, now that we have this big rifle, the riflemen are just going to be able to shoot and sharpshoot the enemy at 800 yards. That's not how it works, right? You don't just become a sharpshooter marksman because you suddenly have a big bullet. Shooting past 500 yards is a challenge. It's hard to identify targets. It's hard to employ the fundamentals properly. And with a big bullet like this, a lot of the folks testing this out have said that this is a nasty, spicy round that is going to make it harder for folks to actually shoot. Because there's so much recoil, it can take competent shooters and make them wishy-washy. Even good shooters are having a tough time wrangling that recoil. And to make that even worse, the Army is actually fielding 2 different types of ammunition. It's not just the 6.8 by 51. There's a milder version that they use for training, and they have a spicy one that you would use for combat. The reason they do this is because this is such a spicy bullet that it's going to eat out and wear out the barrel because the chamber pressures are so intense. So when guys are actually going to the range and shooting, mostly they're shooting this much milder bullet that doesn't have those insane chamber pressures. And I think there's something inherently fundamentally wrong with training with a very mild load and then expecting to go into combat and be able to shoot that cartridge the same capabilities. It's just not going to happen. And unless we send all of our riflemen over to, marksman school and go to sniper school and get really, really good at the fundamentals, they're just not going to be there. And keep in mind too, these are riflemen. The rifleman is like at the lowest level of the totem pole in the infantry squad. They're privates. They're 17 to 19-year-olds. They don't have that much time under their belt. If this was just, we're just talking about employing this at like a special forces squad, cool, we can do a lot of cool stuff with that. I can understand a lot of the assets. But when we're talking about the entire 101st Airborne, the 10th Mountain, just fielding these as the rifle, we run into some serious issues there with both, as we've talked about before, the sustainability of having such a big bullet and losing out on that ammo capacity. Also, they're not going to be as accurate as you want them to be. Even with a very accurate platform, it's just not going to work out. But really, I'm dancing around the point a little bit because at the end of the day, if even if everything that I've said thus far wasn't true, even if this rifle does make them expert marksmen, even if this rifle they can provide accurate suppression, and we can decide that we're going to suppress with accuracy and a more sustained round count, even though that doesn't really work like that. But let's say it did. The problem is that we already have weapon systems that suppress. We already have weapon systems that engage the enemy out to range. That's what machine gunners do, right? That's what designated marksmen do. That's what forward observers do to engage the enemy with mortars and artillery at extreme ranges. We don't need everybody on the rifle, everybody on the fire team and the rifle squad to be able to engage the enemy out to 800 to 1,000 meters. What the rifleman is supposed to do, what this guy does, is not engage in that long range suppression, that long range gunfight. They maneuver and they assault, because the rifleman is the only person that can go and, or at least effectively, clear rooms, trenches, bunkers, sewers, dilapidated buildings, collapsed structures. There are so many things as we look into the future of conflict and how much more urbanized it is, and how much more obstacles. Let's just look at Ukraine. The issue is not that we can't hit enemies farther away. Maybe that was an issue in Afghanistan, but most of the world doesn't look like Afghanistan. Most of the world isn't fighting mountaintop to mountaintop. We're fighting trench to trench. We're fighting house to house. And in that, the picture narrows real quick, and you suddenly realize that having a bullet that goes out to 800 meters doesn't matter. What you need is a rifle that is light, maneuverable, and can carry a crap ton of ammunition while still having adequate lethality. And the new M8556, the A1 stuff, that's pretty good stuff. That defeats most enemy body armor right now. And we don't need to switch over to this big bullet that isn't, it's designed to fight a threat that doesn't really exist right now at ranges that we don't see that threat. So all of that is to say, I don't know what they're thinking. I think that this is a huge mistake, and I think that if any conflict popped off, we would be reverting back to the 5.56 AR-15 M4 platform pretty much immediately, because the idea that, this is a good rifle to be clearing trenches with, a good rifle for the rifleman to close that last 100 meters of the gunfight, it doesn't make any sense. People are going to be exhausted. They're not going to have enough ammunition, and all of the fun gadgets, the suppressor and the laser rangefinder, they become liabilities rather than assets.